Hey guys, it's Justin. Welcome back to Mayday, the Handmaid's Tale podcast. This week, we are taking a deep dive into episode 2. We wondered how things were going to go after that impressive pilot episode, and they did not disappoint. We get to see more of the Society of Gilead and get into a little bit more of what it's like to be a handmaid. We play a little awkward Scrabble with the commander, get some more blank spaces filled in from the past, and we're going to ride this roller coaster of emotions, I think, for pretty much the whole season. It's a pretty intense viewing experience. I think you will agree. So all this and more today on today's episode of Mayday, the Handmaid's Tale podcast. Let's go. Mayday, the Handmaid's Tale podcast proudly presents Hardcore Lady Quotes. Quotes of inspiration, empowerment, and rebellion, chosen, recorded, and read by my kid.
I'm not a kid. I'm a shark. From Nimona, a graphic novel by Noelle Stevenson.
All right, welcome back to Mayday, the Handmaid's Tale podcast. We have now had episodes 1 through 3 released on Hulu, and everyone in the room, and hopefully you, have consumed them. So let's just run right into the end. Let's go back to a little bit to episode 1. And where did we leave off? I believe we talked about it. The last thing we saw was they were walking back, and they had both kind of figured out that they were both kind of doing the resistance thing. Because the last line that they said to each other before she said, "There's an eye in your house," was, "It's finally nice to meet you," or meet you for the first time. Because they had actually talked about something that mattered. After that, it was trying to figure out who is the eye in the house. So she walks back in, and she is looking around in a very paranoid fashion because she does not know who the eye is. And we still don't really know who the eye is after 2 more episodes. So, with that, we jump right into episode 2, which opens up with everybody's favorite game, the ceremony. Jason, that's your favorite part, right?
It's not really a game, but that's good.
What? For some it is.
Yeah.
It was a really terrible game.
It's the worst game ever. So, I guess my question...
That's not even the most uncomfortable thing.
No?
And like, well, as we get into it, as we get
Later?
into episode 3 was like I had to watch this late because like we talked about, I was watching hockey game and then consumed this later on after already being disappointed, and then it literally it was hard to get through. Let's just put it that way. Like, there's a couple times where I paused, I'm like, there's 23 minutes left. So let me get through this. And so, yeah, so we'll get into it. But it was, this was sadly enough, not even close to like the top 5 things that happened in these last 2 episodes, in my opinion.
Okay.
Top five
I would
terrible
almost
things.
agree.
Yeah, terrible.
I would almost agree.
Like, it wasn't even in that, which is like really bad.
Yeah, episode
I'm
1
interested in hearing what your top 5 terrible things are,
Yeah.
because you're not a lady.
I mean, if you do think about it, the ceremony was kind of the most uncomfortable part of episode 1. I mean, you got guys hanging on the wall, but
They're already dead.
Yeah, and you didn't see everything leading up to that. You're only seeing the aftermath. The ceremony. You're actually seeing it, and so let's go back. We got ceremony. My question was, how often does the ceremony happen? And I really didn't know, because I don't remember from the book if she ever talked about how often they did it.
They haven't said in the show.
No.
So
Yeah, I don't remember either, but I remember thinking in the first episode, oh God, I hope they don't have to do that all the way through ovulation every month.
Well, and that was why I liked having 2 women on the show, because you guys were having this conversation when we were talking out before the show about when they would do it and how often, and I was just kind of like fascinated watching you 2 talk about things that I've mostly no clue about.
There's an Orthodox Jewish custom or law, depending on how you interpret it, that after you get your period, you have to wait 7 days with no blood before you have sex again. And the idea is that, okay, the rabbis must have known that then you would be at peak fertility when you were ready to go again, and you've had this break where you couldn't have sex during your period and you couldn't have sex the week after. So that leaves this 2-week window when you're super fertile, because people ovulate at different times. And so
bonus,
it can't just
you
be
get
one
extra
night.
horny then too.
Exactly, right? Like, what you can't have, you're waiting and waiting and waiting. And so there's got to be something, I think, with the ceremony where it can't just be once, because they wouldn't miss the window.
Yeah.
It's got to be multiple
especially,
nights.
like, people are not fertile. Like, they are really, this sounds terrible, working hard for it. But so you need to make the most out of every day.
So are we assuming like
ovulation.
daily?
I'm assuming daily for at least a week.
Yeah, at least
Okay.
a week, I would
All
think.
right.
If they're really trying to make the most of their time.
That makes sense. I mean, if the
if they
entire
really
thing
wanted...
that
if
this
they
is
had-
built around is reproducing, I guess,
Yeah.
then you got to go when you can go.
Something I like, I haven't been reading a lot of the commentary because I didn't want it to cloud my own opinion and not know what my own thoughts were. But something I like about a couple of the articles I've read is that they're very upfront about calling it rape, and that she is ceremoniously raped every month. And you have to kind of remember that, especially I think, Jason, when you're saying that's not even the worst thing anymore, that like this ceremonial rape is not the worst thing in her life. There are actually worse things that happen on a daily basis that she has to kind of deal with or forecast or imagine. Or
I think it's in the book where the character says it's not really rape because I knew what I signed up for, but like I think that's a sign of the time the book was written in the early 80s and in Berlin. And today we would be like, no, that is absolutely rape. Your choices were do that or die. That is not that is a false choice. So it's definitely still rape. And I think that's just a sign of the different times we live in from when the source material was actually written.
To build on that, we were talking earlier about the interview I read today, and I think it was the same interview where she said, Margaret Atwood, they were talking to, they asked her about that. And she said, and I didn't know because I didn't remember from the book or the show, they don't really allude to this, that she had a choice. So apparently, like, they have a choice that they can be handmaids or they can go to the colonies, essentially, I guess. You're either handmaid if you're able or you're an unwoman.
Aren't the colonies? Yeah, the colonies are where you're sent to like clean up toxic waste
and die, essentially.
Die a horrible,
so she said,
horrible death.
she has a choice, but it's not a very good one, was her point. So.
And our marriage laws used to not allow rape in marriage, or not count rape in marriage. And so that's part of our history too, right? That you used to be able to say, well, if it was your husband, then you had the choice to marry him. Therefore, you don't have the choice on a nightly basis or daily basis.
Recently, the laws have been adjusted to make it way harder to prosecute husbands and significant others for raping their wives.
Really?
Thanks,
Where
Trump.
at? It's great.
Here.
Really?
Yeah. And they made it legal in Russia. Explicitly.
Yes,
Russia,
I do remember that headline.
Shortly after that, it changed
Russia's
a little
got
bit
some
here too.
issues.
It changed subtly here, but it'll have a big impact on prosecutions.
Fun.
Yeah.
So we open up with that, and now we're walking. They go to the wall again because they're obviously doing their daily shopping. And the only thing I could think of when they're hanging at the wall is the two younger girls seemed very kind of blasé about kind of everything. They were just hanging there, and then the one girl's like, "Okay, I'm gonna go home now," and you're like, "Okay," just very nonchalant. And so that kind of caught me off guard. And then they are walking home, and this is the first time we're really introduced to the resistance part of this show. So OfGlen and OfFred are walking back to their house or their houses, and OfGlen starts to kind of recruit OfFred to be in the resistance. And as they're walking, all of a sudden the big black van pulls up, and they kind of both have this look on their face like, uh-oh, and they know what's coming. And I don't think the viewer necessarily, unless they know the story, knows what's coming. And that is when the first time we see someone actually taken off the street by are they called the Eye? Is that what they're called?
They do imply it in the first episode, so you kind of know what the black van is for.
Right,
you just don't see it actually happen to anybody. Yeah, so like I think that's enough to inform the viewer that like the reason they freeze like that is because they're like, is it here for me? Like everybody would be terrified it's there for them.
And to think that OfFred is that nervous when all she's done really is had a very minor conversation, right? It's not like she is actively
I think
done
she's
a whole
nervous
lot.
about having interacted with Nick.
Oh, maybe.
Because all of that is not
That's
allowed.
true.
They're not supposed to talk to each other.
Well, I mean, in the first episode, you look at it, she talked to Nick. She ran outside the house.
Yeah.
Like, that's, like, huge.
She ran outside the house uncovered at night.
Yes. Yeah, so I think, there's so much for her to be afraid of.
There's so much.
It can't be like, one thing.
If Nick is the Eye in her house, of course she would be, then she would really be in trouble. That's significant. So I think that she is afraid about that.
And that she's just been talking to OfGlen about this resistance thing, and is she spying for the Eye, and then now they're coming to get her like that quick?
Well, there's no cell phones.
Well, it doesn't matter.
How would
there might
know?
be technology? There's obviously technology because it is now.
And Margaret Atwood's
like
other
they got
books
rid of all of it. Yeah, in her the other ones are much more
Orcs
sci-fi.
and Crake books, and yeah.
So I mean, you would think that at least the powerful people and the government might have a way to do that if they were wanting to.
I don't think I've even seen a refrigerator in this show.
And the ear tag, very nice. It's a good thought. I didn't even think of that one. So then, after the guy, they basically just grab a guy off the street, and both of the handmaids are just kind of looking like, oh God, hope it's not me. Especially OfGlen, as you said when we were talking earlier.
Terrified, like
right.
really.
Because she is in the resistance, and
Yeah.
it gets real
They
bad
got
for
one of
her
them.
later. So now we're going back to OfFred's house, and this scene was very interesting because it's kind of her and Nick alone together in the room. I think Serena Joy is there in the beginning, and she walks out, and then Nick comes in. And I thought the really cool thing about this scene was she was coming back from the walk, and so she was taking her jacket off and all this stuff, and she's showing a little bit of leg, like her skirt is pulled up when Nick comes in, and they're both talking, and she just leaves it there and is kind of sitting directly across from him and is kind of giving him this look like are
say
you looking
something.
at it? Or, like there's this little flirtatious thing kind of, and like she's still, because we don't know, still trying to feel him out. And I think maybe she's using that as kind of a way to see who is this guy and what does he believe in, because if he's part of the bigger picture and the overall government guys and is on board with him, you think he would be a little more assertive about
you would
not
think that
looking
he
or
would
saying
like
something.
shame her immediately.
Right.
Even though it's a very modest amount of leg, like barely it's like
knee,
just at the
right?
top of her knee.
Yes, and so this is also when he warns her about talking to OfGlen and tells her that she's kind of bad news and to not trust her. And also says this is when she gets the invitation to meet the commander. The commander wants to see you. To which she is like freaking out because, again, you don't know why anything is happening. That's the one thing that I've noticed with this show. You're like, it puts the viewer like in the shoes of the handmaids amazingly. Like I've never watched a show where so many things, like almost everything means something. And you don't know who to trust and what to believe. Everything that everybody does has a possible consequence and an outcome, and nobody knows which way to go and who to trust.
Well, it's another forced choice, right? Because she can't say no, but she also is not supposed to say yes, and so she's really stuck.
Yeah, it's
between two
completely a
options.
false choice.
Yes, so she's definitely trying to figure out, adds another layer of who to trust, because now she's got the commander doing something the commander's not supposed to do, which is meet with her alone, on top of Nick, who she doesn't really get yet, on top of OfGlen, who is part of the resistance trying to recruit her.
And the commander is basically immune from consequences for what he's doing, because it would take, I think they said in the book, 3 women to make their testimony admissible in court.
Really?
Yeah,
Well, and later
whereas
she doesn't
one
get any
man-
testimony.
Yeah, one man saying something would count as a witness, but in order for a woman to count as a witness or for their testimony to be deemed admissible, it would have to be 3 of them that agree that all saw the same thing. So it doesn't matter if they're caught. It doesn't matter for the commander, because he could always say she just showed up.
Right, and well, he's one of the more powerful ones,
Yes.
as we've heard in the other episode. So the next scene they see is OfFred's bedroom, where she is like freaking out because she's trying to figure out, why does the commander want to see me? He's not supposed to want to see me. I'm not supposed to go see him. This has to be bad. And the one note that I made was they show the shot from the floor up, and they show her shoes. And this is mentioned a lot in the book, especially when she first gets put in the house. She talks about the ceiling fan and shoelaces are missing. So it's all about this them not being able to kill themselves or commit suicide. So you would see that kind of, if you were at a mental facility or some other, like jail, they make you turn in your shoelaces. And so it is just a very cool shot from the floor up, showing that they have taken all these things away.
He's
so they
clearly
have no
a prisoner.
choice. Correct. So they are prisoners. So she's just sitting there trying to figure out what's going on. The next scene we have is the birthmobile, which I love that's what it's called. It is hilarious to me. The Martha comes in, like, super excited, like, hey, birthmobile day.
She was not super excited.
She was, too.
She was
very
happy.
I mean, she was
wasn't
like
her cold self.
Yeah, she
Normal
was
cold
definitely clearly way more excited than normal, but
Sure.
she wasn't like
going
really
from,
smiling much.
aren't you going to take your lunch? Aren't you going to take him his lunch? I'm just like being really cold to her, to like, blessed be the day. Here you go. Birthmobile. I don't know. It was just hilarious. And the birthmobile scene is pretty much played out just like it is in the book. They're riding in the van, and it's red inside the van, and it's all the handmaids kind of.
It's like being in a womb. Like the shot inside the van really made me think of being in a womb. I was like,
That's very
that's
true.
creepy.
And so her and OfGlen are talking a little bit, and you kind of get a little more insight into OfGlen. And she does make the one comment where she says not bad for a rug munching gender traitor, which is the first time you hear the term gender traitor in the story, which will definitely come back later on for OfGlen, and not in a good way. So then we find out that Janine is the one having the baby, and everybody knows that Janine is the best, so we're super excited. So we get to the house, and it is posh. It is decked out, and there's decorations, and there's cake going on, or was it macaroons? It was like a macaroon
It was like a macaroon tower.
Pyramid almost,
Yeah.
like a tree. And so that was the first thing that struck me. It was like very Marie Antoinette. If you've ever seen that movie,
Yes,
and
definitely.
it's just filled with cakes.
Very decadent.
Yeah.
All the pastel treats you can imagine.
Yes. And so we walk in, and it's kind of bizarre because we know Janine is the one having the baby, but when we walk in, we are kind of thrown a curveball, if you will, and that you see the wives with someone on the floor, and you're like, in your head, you're looking for Janine, and the lady they show is 100%
Definitely.
not Janine.
Not Janine.
Older and not
Older
Janine.
blonde
Not
lady.
missing an eye. Telltale sign.
Definitely too.
And so you're like, that's not Janine. What is going on here? Is this like a multiple birthing place? Me and Todd, we talked about, we had the same thought. I was like, so is this like they have multiple things going on? Because there's lots of noises going on everywhere, and so you don't really know.
Well, and they're making the like Lamaze breathing sounds in there. They're like making
and encouraging
doing
her.
birth things
Yes,
in
the
that
wives
room,
are just
clearly.
going through this with her, going through this whole ritual, and so you think that's what it is.
It looks like a birth is happening in there.
And was that the scene where she's eating the grapes, like for no
There
reason?
was
in the
somebody
corner?
like with a bowl of grapes in there.
Yeah.
It really threw me off.
I
Grapes
think it was Mrs. Waterford.
weird. Oh, was it? Okay. So then we go upstairs, and that's where we find Janine, who is in labor, hardcore.
She did an amazing job. It's one of those things where like even after you've gone through it, at least for me, probably not the case for everybody, you only half remember it because you're in so much pain and you're going through such a difficult thing often for a really long time. You kind of detach after a bit, and you maybe are on painkillers, you maybe have been in the most intense pain of your life for 20 hours. There are so many things going on, you don't remember it very well, but as soon as I saw her and heard her, it kind of all came rushing back.
Yeah.
It was real accurate, except for, like they were clearly there just like at the very, very, very end. Sure. Like, don't get any ideas, people. It's not that fast. Yeah, it was
Wait
was
a minute.
crazy
Are you
good.
telling me that it takes longer than like 10 minutes to
For
birth a
most
baby?
people, yes. Although I have heard
What?
stories.
That's crazy.
That actress did a great job, and I have like a whole new respect for that actress now
She is
because she
great.
did fantastic,
was
and that
great.
has got to be the most horrible thing to try to have to depict accurately and like stay in the moment at the time, and like it's very physically difficult and awkward. And
yeah, I was gonna say like
and
the
in
things
this
you have to do
particular
with your
scene,
body.
you have to show all of these things happening to you without being able to really describe them, and like so many different physical things happening at the same time. It's just, I was very impressed. She was really good.
So we get there, and OfFred kind of comes around this large group of handmaids, like I guess
like
maybe all the
20
handmaids in
women
the
in that
town, like they
room.
just got them all there. And she comes around, and she's sitting next to Janine and holds her hand and touches her stomach, and then we go into this flashback scene where it is her, OfFred, June, in her former existence, I guess you could call it, in labor, on her way to the hospital with Luke, her husband. They pass some protesters, so you know that kind of the government stuff is kind of in flux.
And that I was pausing, thinking, what are they protesting? Are they? Does somebody do abortions at the hospital, or are they protesting?
That was my first thought, but then the protesters looked pretty peaceful as they arrived, and that made me think like maybe it's because people are already going so quickly infertile that they're like praying at the hospital or something to that effect, because they seemed
Right, because there were kind of a mixture of prayer.
Yeah,
because they show
at
both. They
at
show
first it
protesters
looked
with
more like-
signs
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
people praying.
Yeah.
And so you were kind of like, are those people against each other? Are they
Yeah, it was not- it
protesting
was
and doing
not
the same?
super clear.
Yeah, I didn't really understand that, but I don't know if I'm supposed to yet.
Maybe it was like the Pepsi protest, right? Just for like, come together. Let us all learn.
somebody
from
called the Jenners.
I didn't see the commercial. I did hear
good.
about it. I don't think I need to see it.
that. No.
You don't.
It involved a Kardashian. Am I correct?
Yes.
Don't
by
need to see
proxy.
Although I did read something totally interesting, and this was in the Margaret Atwood interview, that apparently Kim Kardashian like threw in some money for this movie about the Armenian genocide. I did not realize that they were Armenian. I did not know that.
They just visited Armenia recently.
And she threw in this little thing at the end of this interview about how they were asking, how this could take place in such a society, and what do people do when they find out that this kind of thing starts going on where people are just getting killed left and right. And she talked about the Armenian genocide movie that's coming up. I've seen a couple trailers for it. And how the Kardashians, somebody came to their church when her father, I guess, lived, whoever, I'm not sure what part of her family.
Father.
Well, there's her father. Okay. When he lived, when they were in Armenia, and they came to the church and said, everybody here is going to die. You guys need to go. Like tomorrow, everyone in here is going to be killed. And some people, like in this society, in the show, were like, oh, nothing's going to happen. It'll be fine. And they said her father believed it, and so they got out. And that's how they got here. And then the next day, they came and killed everybody. And I was like, that's crazy. Because A, it puts a little human face on the Kardashians, which I don't know if I approve of. But it's okay, because they do their best to take it off every chance they get. But yeah, that was just an interesting note that I just thought about. So we go back to labor in the hospital. And there's protesters outside. We get to the hospital. We don't see much of the hospital. We just get the room view at first. And she's had the baby. And I thought it was really cool seeing, because the baby is obviously darker with her, and it's kind of juxtaposed to June at the time.
And she's a very pale person.
Yeah, she's very pale.
She's very fair-skinned.
And Luke, much like every husband would be, is sleeping on the couch, because that's how you roll. I remember that very vividly. Like, I've never been more tired in my life than when I was at the hospital.
Poor thing.
I know, right? And I didn't even do anything at all.
Must have been tough for you.
I remember the first time they brought her in for a feeding, it was 3 o'clock in the morning. And they don't care. Like, they care, but they don't care about you, the husband. They just, bam, lights on. Somebody needs to eat. And I was like, oh, my God. So Luke is out on the couch, and the nurse comes and takes the baby, Hannah, and they're walking down the hall. And this scene is awesome, because they're walking down the hall, and they're approaching the nursery. And as soon as they get to the nursery, it's like, no babies in the nursery. And you're like, what's going on there? And she asks her, and she said, oh, it was a rough night. And, 4 are in the ICU and 2 are with God,
with
I
God.
think is what she says.
Word choice.
And you're like, oh, because then it all of a sudden, because they don't address the birth plague much, like by name. They don't really talk about the infertility. It just kind of is in that society. So in the current time that you're watching, so it kind of brings it all back to the fact that normally that would be chock full of babies. And so just to see that was just a bam, punch in the gut. And you're just really in the moment of how bad things really are.
Yeah,
I think what that did... Oh, sorry.
Go for it.
No, go ahead.
It took it out of the... Because there's so much being written right now about how it relates to today and how this could happen to us. And for me, that took it one step back from that. Because I think for right now, a lot of the things that are said about women and the restrictions that are placed on our bodies are not based on a birth plague. They're just based on wanting to restrict women's bodies for whatever reason, or for a sincere belief that, abortion is morally wrong. But it's not that same we don't have enough babies problem. Like there isn't a concrete fear. It's more an abstract fear of what would happen if we had women have this choice. And so I thought it made it a little bit more, I guess, action-y and less kind of hypothetical about society to think, oh, well, they were, not that it makes it okay, but, oh, they were really afraid that they were going to die out or something, rather than...
That there was a palpable fear of we're not going to be able to, sustain the human race, I guess. Mm-hmm. Because I know in the book, it's more contained to the specific part of the United States. Because in the book, it's not even the whole United States. It's very much a large portion of the United States, but there's still, fighting going on. But then, the rest of the world... I don't remember if they had the same thing. If it was just concentrated to the United States or if the plague had kind of gone worldwide.
I don't remember.
I don't think it said.
I don't remember it ever talking about the rest of the world except when it mentions the Jews that didn't make it back to Israel.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
And
the
then
only
at the
time I
very
remember
end
it
with
mentioning
the
outside of America
symposium
and Canada.
Yeah. So that scene is crazy, and it only gets crazier from there.
Did you notice in that scene that what made me think it had been going on, the low birth rate had been going on for a long time was there was hardly anybody working in that maternity ward, which is weird and creepy. It made the scene with the baby napper way creepier because June gets out into the hallway and like there's nobody there. Like the 3 people that were working all went to chase where they thought the kidnapper was, and so there's just nobody there, and that makes the confrontation that happens way scarier.
Well, and then you also...
And she is way calmer than I would have been.
Right. Well, and you also... That's kind of a thing that you don't think about, of a unintended but natural consequence of the low birth rate in the plague is you don't need as many people to work at a hospital that no one is giving birth at, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that I hadn't even thought. I told just now, like, we don't need a large staff because there's not babies.
Ward. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next thing we have is... what do we have? Oh, so at some point in the Janine birthing scene, and I forget when it is, OfGlen tells OfFred when they're talking about the resistance stuff. Oh, I know what it is. OfGlen is trying to get OfFred to get some information from the commander. And she wants... I'm trying to remember. She wants her to get the information from the commander, and she doesn't want to get the information. At the birth of Janine, she says something to her, and it ends with OfGlen basically saying, I can handle it. I'm sneaky. Which, if you've watched any kind of horror movie ever, you know that means that OfGlen is hosed.
She basically said, I'll be right back. Exactly.
And I knew that's what I wrote down. I was like, this is how you know she's in trouble. So you know right at that moment that something terrible is going to happen to her. They do not let us down in the terrible department at all in this show. They have ratcheted up the intensity. I don't even know if there's a number. Like going from like the pilot episode, the first episode was great, but this second episode just dialed it up. And I was sitting there watching it, like I had a blanket up on my face.
You had a blanket over your head?
Not over my head. I wasn't full over my head, but I was like, oh my gosh, because it was just like, it is insane. So we have that line, which I thought was great. So you know something bad's going to happen to OfGlen at some point. You're just not sure what, because you know she's the one that's in the resistance, and she's very cavalier kind of about the fact that she is in the resistance.
But she was so careful when she was first feeling out OfFred. Like I felt surprised that she seemed so cavalier when it came out that they were both basically on the same side and thinking similarly. She did seem very cavalier, and I was like, but she was so careful before because we thought she was a pious bitch.
That's true. She does kind of let go and kind of
she let her guard down or something.
Yes, she did, and not good for her. So then we get to the Mean Girls scene, which is the wives, which is Serena Joy and 3 other wives, I believe, or 2, in this parlor, because they're not participating at this point in the Janine birthing part. And so OfFred walks in there because I don't even know why she's not in the other room, but she's just off, and she walks in, and one of the wives asks her, would you like a cookie? In a very kind of condescending, like, because, again...
As if they're talking to a dog or a small child.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Would you like a cookie, OfFred? And it was almost like, you would offer a child a cookie.
It's the way you would talk to a 2-year-old.
And they respond the same way, right? She's so well behaved. So that's the same way that you respond to it.
That's how people talk about dogs.
And you saw that look on her face like, I can't believe that somebody just asked me, and that I have to deal with the fact that somebody needs to ask me if I can have a cookie. And then I have to get permission to have a cookie. And she just has that look on her face like, this is awful. And I can't believe this is my life.
She's really regretting that turn into that doorway.
Yeah, exactly. And Serena Joy kind of pauses for a minute after the initial question is asked and is, OfFred, would you like a cookie? And it's very...
And so disdainful. She clearly is also loathing this moment. Yes. Like, why are you bothering my handmaid?
And then they had the great shot where it's all 3 of them looking at her. And that's when I totally thought of Mean Girls, because the one wife is just kind of sitting back there like with her head cocked, kind of giving her this side-eye kind of glance. And you're just like, God, it's terrible. Like, you already have all the power, and to feel the need to like throw it in their face. But I guess, because then when she walks out, she makes the comment of they're all whores, all of them or something, making the comment about all the handmaids. And I guess if they do have this low opinion of all these people, all these other women, it kind of has dehumanized them at that point, because they are clearly breeding stock to this society. So I just thought that was an interesting scene. Is that Did anybody else get the Mean Girls vibe from that whole
I
thing?
didn't until you said it, but it completely fits. It mainly made me think about how clearly the society was structured to turn these different groups against each other. That seems really like an intentional decision. They don't interact really at all. One group has to get permission from the other group to do anything at all, to speak. I mean, it's so adversarial intentionally. It just made me really aware of how very much like conquering a warring society this takeover was. Like, that is how you divide and conquer.
Well, you can even see it today. I mean, just in the way that the United States especially is split, and how, you see people referring to Mexican immigrants, for example, and there is for the people that are so against it, it's almost like you're not talking about a human being, because the news that those people probably consume and the information they probably get does not treat those people like human beings.
Yeah, it makes it, when you start using epithets and things, it's just, they're no longer humans in your mind. They're just a group of other.
You can do anything to anybody that you can do anything to anybody that you don't think is a person or is equal to you. You can treat them like property. And we've seen that happen clearly with, throughout time with various forms of oppression. And it's just crazy to see, especially today, and it drives me nuts. We go back to the hospital. Oh, no, I'm sorry. We're going to Janine giving birth. So Janine's giving birth. And again, we say Janine is accurate on giving birth. She does an awesome job. This actress that, I thought she was cool in the first one because she was kind of crazy and out there. But she kind of dials it up a notch, this performance in this episode specifically. So she is full on in labor. It is time to push. Everybody is chanting and breathing and chanting and breathing, and the wife comes in and sits behind her in the weird chair.
So creepy.
Right?
So weird.
The weird chair was weird. And
that chair was described in the book, but seeing it being used in practice was just a whole different level of weird. Like, I definitely did not accurately imagine how strange that would be. Seeing it on screen acted out. And Janine's busy. Like, she is not concerned with how strange the situation is at the moment. But it just seemed so bizarre that everybody was taking this as normal, and I was just watching it with eyes the size of saucers, slowly shaking my head the whole time. Like, what is happening?
It was very bizarre.
So strange.
And so the wives come in. Janine has the baby, and there's that moment that you kind of knew was coming where they have to wait to see if it's going to cry, because low birth rate, bad things going on. Finally, it cries. Bonus. And I believe it's immediately taken away.
It was longer than I thought, because I was right away they're not even going to let her hold the baby. And I don't think they did, but it was a little bit longer, where you're just waiting for the baby to be taken away from her.
So they give her to the wife, who is now moved from the floor at the first floor of the house to sitting behind Janine to now she's in the bed.
In the bed where Janine was laboring.
So she's
as if she just went through labor.
Going through this whole bizarre mock ritual of childbirth to make her feel better about the fact that she can't, and so she just does it. That part was bizarre to me. And
yeah, that part was definitely not in the Bible.
No.
Here's my question about
even
the wives.
I know that.
About the what?
The wives. Because I just then, and maybe this is just reading too much into it, but is it if they were all married to the commanders before, right? And then they came into the society, how are there wives who can have children? And how did they all end up barren, and yet the women who are their same age are the handmaids, and it just seems like a little bit too coincidental.
So, there's two big differences in the book. First, in the book, most of the wives and commanders are significantly older.
And that's what made more sense.
So they're aging out of having babies anyway. They're beyond aging out of having babies. And also in the book, they mention, which they haven't addressed yet at all in the show, and I'm wondering if they're going to leave out, is the I forget what their title was, but they were basically the common wives.
The Econo wives.
Econo wives.
Yes.
And they were Martha's wives and handmaids in one. They were responsible for having babies, cleaning, cooking, making a home, and they were officially
wasn't
the
that
wife.
for lower.
Yes, so that's for
income,
the
like less
that's for the less
powerful
important
commanders.
men.
Like
I don't
when
think
she
they were
talks about
commanders. I think
Nick-
that's just for less important men in society.
In the first episode, I was just rewatching it because my wife was watching it, and she talks about Nick and how he's lower on the totem pole because he hasn't even been assigned a woman yet. So Nick
Yeah.
would probably be one that gets assigned the Econo wife, who is kind
Yeah.
of the catch-all
yes.
Martha wife, handmaid,
Yeah.
do-it-all wife.
I
'Cause I
keep
kind of
waiting
got-
for them to be in
Yeah.
the show.
Yeah, they've not been mentioned at all.
I feel like we're awfully far in to not have mentioned them yet, so maybe they're being
Because
left
you gotta
out
think
completely,
we're-
which really does change the dynamic between the upper class wives and the handmaids, because there is not some other and Martha's, that's your options right there, or else you're sent off to die.
And you get the sense in the book, I think, that there's really no love lost between the commander and Serena Joy, that they don't really have a relationship. And in the
No.
show, you feel like there maybe was. There maybe did have
she seems
that.
deeply sad.
Yes.
Which
Well,
makes me
yes.
feel like they had a real relationship.
Yeah, and again, I think part of that in the book is due to the fact that they are older, so there's longer marriage there. So, you kind of get that vibe.
Yeah,
of
yeah, they're
they're
a
married
lot
for a long
older.
time, and maybe the flame has just died out.
Yeah, the implication in the book is that they're probably in their late 50s.
Right. So Janine gives birth. After that, I believe we have the baby napping scene.
Oh, wait, sorry. I forgot
Yes.
to bring something up. Sorry. No, the one thing I thought was really odd about this when I was in my half with it.
It's all odd. You're talking
Well, I mean,
really
like,
odd.
super,
Odd even for
okay,
this.
so the aunt was there, right? Like, helping out, right?
Yes, she was kind of cheering them on.
Well,
like-
and that's the thing that was, like, super awkward to me. Like, she was there, and she was almost like, Janine was, like, almost comforted that she was there, but yet this is the woman that literally said, I cattle prodded you, and I took your eye out.
yeah.
And then that's the thing. It's like she's so, like, I guess, quote unquote, beaten down or just like whatever
It's very,
that she does.
like Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like this
Like she's
woman
identifying
is-
with her oppressor.
Yeah, like this woman, like, has done all this to me, yet, like, oh, she's here to cheer me on now, and I completely like wipe out
Well, and you got
what happened. I obviously at least
Right.
9 months ago.
To some degree, you can write a little bit off in that she was like hardcore laboring.
Right,
during
that's what
that.
I was
So
gonna
like
say.
she is just like whatever, get this baby out.
Yeah, it's
I'm
true,
working
but
on
still,
it.
I thought it was awkward that she
This
was
is
kinda,
really
like,
hard. She's just like
there, and
really
it's just- it was
enveloped in
real-
what
it was
she's
kind
doing.
of like made that even seem even more awkward that woman's there, that
Yeah.
obviously done awful things to probably most of the women that are there, and then
but you got to think that
the one scene that we've seen, obviously.
Yeah.
But again, they
And
are
she's like
they,
a true believer, it seems like,
Yeah.
too.
The ants are the ones that do all these terrible things, but they're also the only ones that kind of show them any affection, for lack of
Yeah.
a better term, in that they are coming from a place of love, and that they're trying to condition them this way because it's what's best for them, and it's
Yeah.
their role, and this is what God has intended, and they're very, lovey about it that way. Even though they have to be, they had the parental role essentially. Is that yes, I love you, but sometimes I have to do these terrible things to you. Not that that's how you're supposed to parent, but
With cattle
in this
prods.
society, with cattle
Disclaimer,
prods,
that is
that's
not
kinda
how any
they're
of us
rolling.
parent.
So you just thought Aunt Lydia was weird, just being there.
Well, it's just like the whole like chant, like she was like cheering on and trying to calm, but yeah, like the calming influence when obviously she's going through like obviously a traumatic thing, and yet she's the one who caused like traumatic things to her. So it kind of was just like
She got her in that situation.
yeah, it was kind of like one of those things where you're like almost yin and yang type thing, where you're just like
sure.
both sides of the coin. Where
Right.
so that's why I thought it was odd. So
And Ann Dowd, especially in that scene where she is just like totally into it and come on, girls, breathe, push. She just does awesome. She has been great. Like even
Yeah.
rewatching the first episode, her performance is just killer.
She's so into it.
Yes, and that role is just nuts.
That is
For
a-
like Jason was saying, just from the polars,
Yeah, the
opposites
swings.
that you have to play with the girls, and being the muscle and being the heart. So now we have the handmade group hug, which is one of my favorite parts. Everybody, your baby's gone. Group hug.
Depressing group hug.
More for a visual aspect, I think, than really any practical thing there. It was a great shot.
Yeah, the cinematography in the show has
The-
been pretty
the
awesome. It's
setup,
been
yeah.
very movie-like,
Yes.
and that's been really
The
nice
production
to see.
value is outstanding. Like, as good
Yes,
as you will see.
we are going to talk about the music.
Yes, and as good as
It's
anything you will see in the
fantastic.
theater, in my opinion. So we get in the flashback to the hospital. And this is kind of a messed up scene. So we get to Just give me a look like
Kind of.
Kind of. I believe the June gets up and she is trying to find the baby, and she can't find the baby. She also cannot find the nurse or anyone else. It's very stark. There's not very many people around to begin with, as we said before, and she starts kind of panicking because she can't find anybody. And so she gets Luke, and they start running around, and the next thing you know, you see this lady who is walking with a baby, and the alarm starts going off prior to that in the hospital, which if anybody, for those people who have had kids, know that when you're in a labor ward, anytime that, I believe they have that's what the bracelet is, right?
Mm-hmm. The bracelet is,
Yes.
It says the same thing for you, for the mom and for the
Right,
baby,
but it also
so nobody
has
can leave with the baby
alarm on
except
it.
the mother.
There is also an alarm in it, usually at whatever hospital you're at, that if they leave that certain area, that the alarm goes off. So you hear that alarm and you're like, uh-oh, bad times. So then you see the lady, and she turns around to talk to June and is talking about how it's her baby, and you can clearly see that something terrible has happened to her, that she thinks this is her child, and she's obviously disassociated from pretty much everything. And they do eventually get it back, but it's very intense there because you're not sure where that's going to go. Obviously she doesn't take her, but you don't know what direction that's going to go and how violent it's going to go because we just find the nurse laying in a pool of her own blood 5 seconds ago. So that was a very scary scene that I did not anticipate coming.
After that scene, this movie was full of flashbacks to me, and just it made me think about being in the hospital and like the walking around you do while you're in the hospital before, during laboring, and afterward, because there is nothing else to do. I found myself really thinking about like the experience of being in the hospital and how creepy it would have been to walk out and see nobody. And her husband wasn't there. Like she woke up and he was not there in the room. He had gone off to get like a snack and coffee or something. Right. And she didn't know where he was, and she walked out of the room and she was alone and doesn't know where the baby is. And I think that must be every parent's nightmare.
Sure.
I mean, it's
especially
just,
that early on.
Yeah, especially that early on. And with a first child, you feel like you don't know what you're doing, and like you might be fucking it all up, and like everything's going to be horrible. Like most people feel like that the first time, I think, and that's literally probably something that most parents probably have a nightmare about.
Sure.
It was just so realistically depicted. It was truly disturbing.
And again, it adds another layer of this is how bad the birth plague part has gotten for society, is that this woman is wandering around a hospital stealing a baby. After that, we are back to Janine, who is nursing. That scene is messed up because she's singing Three Little Birds to the kid while she's doing it, and you just feel terrible for her because you know that she doesn't get to see this child other than to basically nurse it, and then the wife kind of comes and grabs it away.
I was waiting for somebody to bust into the room and like start beating her for singing or something.
So then we let's move on to the commander scene. So we have finally gotten to the evening where it is time for her to meet the commander, and she still doesn't know why, and she's giving this great monologue as she's walking down the hallway about how she feels like she's the girlfriend in the horror movie that's looking in the basement and is going, "Justin, are you down there?" Spoiler alert, I'm not down there. I'm hanging out. So she gets down there and is talking about how that girl is always the moron because who goes in the basement in the dark in the horror movie, which is the thing you never do. And so she's like, please don't let me be a moron, as she gets to the door. She opens the door and walks in for the commander. We are introduced finally to the commander's study, I guess, is more or less what it is. Kind of a den, library area that is stocked with books and all kinds of, paraphernalia and things from... You think, I don't know, it's kind of hard to tell. Like, it's various, it looks like a museum in there, basically. And so she sits down, and they have this conversation, and he asks her, would you like to play a game? And she kind of looks like, what do you mean? And then he pulls out a Scrabble box, and now it's time for the world's most awkward game of Scrabble. As it is in the book, because you're like, why does this dude want to play Scrabble with me? So they cut to the Scrabble scene because that's really where we go with this. And the Scrabble scene is great because they pull out the game and they're flipping the tiles, and it's all very surreal. And it's given from her viewpoint of she is so excited to see this game that has letters on it. And they show the tiles in front of her as she's picking them out, and she's making words with them in front of her because they don't get to see any. They can't read, so they can't do anything. So it is like this pleasure derived from this mundane, game that you would play with your family. back when things were normal, the time before.
It's
as
one
they
of those
say.
things that, like, not only do people take for granted those kinds of things, but, like, people are like, playing Scrabble again. Whatever. Maybe I can cut out early. And in this situation, it's like the most joyous thing that she's seen in ages.
Yes, and she takes great pleasure from it, and the commander is very pleasant to her. There is no, I think she is the character. She's still obviously got to have this paranoia vibe of when is the other shoe going to drop. But the viewer doesn't necessarily get that at all. He comes off as very genuine and very kind of father figure-esque. Like
I just kept wondering what was going on between him and Serena that he wasn't playing Scrabble with her. Because we never see them interact. And it's not like he has ever interacted on a personal level with
OfFred.
It's hard for me to even call her June. I'm still bugged by the fact that we know her name. I don't know if I like that or not. So there's got to be something else going on, right? Like is she such a rule follower that she would never do that? Is she is their marriage actually really terrible? But you don't quite understand, I think, why he needs to do this particular thing with.
Well, there is a
his
funny
family.
line with OfGlen earlier that I'm just remembering where she's talking about the commander wants to see me, and OfGlen's first response is, well, maybe he just wants a blowjob. Sometimes they're into things like that. And so
That was my first thought.
Your first thought was that? Sexual favors?
Yes.
Outside
And that would
of
be
the-
Yes,
more-
that was totally
make
my
more
first
sense,
thought.
right?
Yes.
That would make more sense. You're right.
It's more, like, appropriate to the situation than Scrabble.
Yeah. I guess if you had a million guesses, Scrabble not even on the list. So they play, and she wins, but doesn't beat him by very much, and she said she was out of practice, so clearly she's a Scrabble fanatic player.
Like
And then-
Roxanne Gay. I'd like to add.
Yes,
in.
Roxanne Gay. That was one of the things, like in Bad Feminist, where she does this whole essay on her competitive Scrabble tournaments that she takes place in.
Semi-professional.
Semi-professional Scrabble player. So I did think of that when we were watching that. So we get done with that scene, and they talk about her beating him, and he's like, "We should have a rematch." And she makes this quick little quip of, "I'll check my schedule," and they both kind of look at each other, and she's kind of thinking, "Oh, is that the wrong thing to say?" And he just kind of plays it off. They walk away, and I believe they shake hands, right? They
Yeah,
touch.
it was a very weird, slow handshaking
And I thought that was interesting because, like, it was kind of like
that he initiated.
yes. And so the way I took it, I don't know how you took it, was that I think in my head, could be wrong, that he's trying to get closer to her since he does have to do this thing with her every 2 weeks out of a month, we assume, with the ceremony. So maybe that he is maybe a little more sensitive version of one of these guys, and that he's trying to at least give her some comfort level with him. That he's going to bring her in and play this game that maybe, as Rhea said, that he can't do with his wife because maybe she's the rule follower, and this would be very much against anything that they had. But also to give her, like, okay, I know we have to do this horrible thing, and maybe he thinks it's horrible, and that they're getting closer kind of makes it a little less horrible as it can be. I don't know.
Wouldn't it be more horrible to get closer to the woman that you have to have sex with in front of your wife?
Yeah. That's why I thought it was more this story's version of a guy cheating on his wife.
Then
that makes sense.
Because, like, obviously words, you can't, like, that's forbidden, and all he's doing is forbidden. So
Yes.
that's like,
oh, that's a good thought.
obviously,
So-
a version of,
Yeah.
like, in this story, obviously.
Right, because
but-
in your normal story, the sex part of it would be the forbidden thing, but they're already doing that. So now the talking and reading and playing Scrabble is kind of the
because
forbidden
obviously
thing.
when they're doing the ceremony, it's very just like, I guess
It's-
quote unquote by the book, but just like very like
Works
It's like a
very
business
certain,
transaction.
Yeah, it's very certain. Like,
Yes.
okay, here.
It's for the purpose
the
of
wife
reproduction.
is here. She does this. I do this, and it's very like
Yes.
like beep. I say beat by beat, but I don't know if it really makes sense. That's not good.
Oh, that's good. I did not think
Yeah.
about that, but that is probably far closer to the truth than mine.
I didn't really think of either of those things specifically, but I was thinking about how lonely everybody must be in this world. And like maybe this is just his like reaching out and like trying to like have any kind of connection with another human.
And then again, like, why isn't his marriage like that? I want
Yeah,
to know.
that's true.
If they were married before and they got to keep the spouse that they had chosen before, then what's going on with all of these commanders and wives that none of them seem to have that?
But have we seen the commander and his wife in the same room and interacting with each other more than just during the ceremonies and introducing OfFred to them?
The only other scene where they're together is at the end, or the kind of towards the end of the first episode, where all the commanders are meeting in that meeting room, and Serena Joy just happens to be in there as they're walking out, and they see each other. So,
wow.
Now after we leave the room, she goes back to her room and just starts basically a scene of her laughing her ass off because she's like, oh my god, I was worried about all of this, and we played friggin' Scrabble and how ridiculous it is. And so you as the viewer, like, they're building up this whole thing. It's awful. They build up this whole episode to make you feel a little bit more comfortable and give her a little bit of optimism, and she's kind of joining the resistance at this point, and she's feeling better about the commander in an odd sort of way, as good as you can feel about it. And so they get to one of the best parts of anything I've seen recently, which is her walking down the steps to "Don't You Forget About Me" by Simple Minds, like in Breakfast Club. And it was outstanding. Like,
and she's thinking like all these positive thoughts. She's like, OfGlen is going to be so proud of me. I got information that I can tell her. And
that he was going to DC for
right, because she did.
She did, and she seemed like really uncomfortable doing it.
That was the other part.
No,
yeah, because that was the part where he mentioned, I'm going to be out of town next week, so we'll play next week when we come back. But she's walking down the steps, and she's got kind of this defiant look on her face, like feeling really good about herself. And she sees Nick, and the question that she poses in her head to Nick is, does he care what happens? Like, does Nick think that her and the commander were fooling around? And she's like, he totally cares what happens. Like, you can tell that she kind of think that Nick is into her. And then, swiftly, I might add, as good as you were feeling about yourself, you are feeling terrible. Because you get to the end of the sidewalk, go into the gate, and pow. New OfGlen.
What's great too, though, is that you don't see it head on. She actually starts talking, and then you see the power, I think, of the wings that they wear, because she doesn't realize it at first, because she just looks like any other person in that position. It's not until she realizes she's gone off script, because the other woman responds with whatever the scripted line is there, that you know that it's not.
And the other woman gives this she has this look on her face, like. And I don't know if I'm just reading into it because I'm the viewer and you know that OfGlen is gone because she got in trouble. But this new OfGlen, who says, when she asks, she goes, where's OfGlen? And the last line is, I am OfGlen. And you're like, oh, well, that can't be good. Yeah. But she does have this look on her face like, how are you going to react to this? Like, this very much this facial expression of the other actress was like, I am OfGlen. What do you think about that? And you're like, oh, this is bad. And so, as swiftly as you were built up by this, like, good feelings that she was having and the resistance and her feeling kind of rebellious, you are just punched in the gut big time with the loss of OfGlen, which ends episode 2, which was one of the more intense viewing experiences I've had in a long time.
Yeah, I really also thoroughly enjoyed the music choice, as I did at the end of the first episode as well.
Yes, with You Don't Own Me. I don't even know what the song is called because I didn't think to write it down or look it up. Their use of the music at the very end is kind of going to be one of those things that's a theme, and I love that. I love it too. And the original score happening during the show is so different than the music choices they used to close, or like the Don't You Forget About Me started playing well before the very end of the show. Like, it felt like part of the episode, not part of the closing. What they're doing, like the juxtaposition between those two things, is really interesting and kind of like jerks me back and forth between like, this could be anytime, no, this is totally now, or this could be anywhere, and this is very specific. It's really neat, and I'm so glad they did it, even though the first time I saw it, watching the first episode, I was like, this is very jarring. I don't know what I think about this. But upon the second viewing of the first episode, and now having watched 2 and 3, I am thoroughly a fan of it, and I think it's amazing. The song choices have just been so on point. Now I know what you're thinking. Justin, that is a really abrupt way to end a podcast. And you're correct. I'll be honest. We thought that we were going to be able to do a shorter show one show over episodes 2 and 3, but there was so much to talk about that we had to actually split it up into 2 full episodes. And just the way the recording worked, that's the ending you got. So stay tuned for episode 3 coming up after this. But right now I want you to listen to part 2 of our interview with John Marcotte of HeroicGirls.com. At the conclusion of part 1 of our interview with John Marcotte from HeroicGirls.com, we talked briefly about the controversy at Marvel, who had done really good things in the areas of diversity and bringing in more female superheroes, and how someone higher up in their company had allegedly talked about the fact that that had not worked and that sales were not being increased and that it was time to go back to a more traditional superhero landscape of male superheroes and getting back to more traditional storylines. So John also wanted to let us know what the big problem is with comics as a whole and the industry.
The big problem that traditional superhero comics had is that they completely abandoned the retail market a while ago, and they went only to specialty shops. You have to go to a comic book store to find comic books. When I was a kid, I would find superhero comics at the grocery store or at 7-Eleven. That's how I fell in love with comics. I would go to the grocery store with my mom, and she would drop me off in front of the little magazine rack, and I would read comic books there while she shopped for groceries and then pick me up again. The major companies, everybody actually, all the comic book superhero companies have just left that market. So there's not really a great way to introduce new readers, and attracting women is a new audience for them. So even when they put out this content that would appeal to, I think, a lot of women and girls, they're having a hard time figuring out how to get that content in front of them so that they can experience it and find out that they love it. The movies certainly prove that women will react to these characters. They've had a lot of success. Absolutely. In attracting, particularly movies like Guardians of the Galaxy, where a significant percentage of the cast is female. So, I think that's basically the problem. Marvel pushed into this area saying, we're going to attract women in and we'll pick up some there. And we're going to broaden the audience base of comics. Comics will die if they don't start growing pretty fast. Their base is dwindling and dwindling and dwindling. They used to sell millions of copies of every issue. That just doesn't happen anymore. And I think they slit their own throat by not giving themselves any way for new people to enter unless, like, their dad is into it and brings them into the store or something like that. The only way
it is very much a members only club almost. Where,
it's a members only club
to get in. And what of that members only club? What share of the blame do the readers take? What is the issue with comic book audiences and change?
I hate to stereotype, but comic book lovers we're a bunch of nerds. And one thing nerds love is minutia and trivia and don't like change. And I think what has happened with Marvel is they made a lot of changes to large characters really quickly. And so the purists, that want these characters to kind of remain frozen in amber forever, hated it. They hated the fact that Thor was a woman or that Captain America was black. And they came up with all sorts of reasons why they didn't like that, and they reacted negatively to it. And on the flip side, I don't think Marvel had a great strategy to pick up the new viewers who I think are new readers, who I definitely think are out there. And so some of the sales didn't work out as well as they would like, because there was because characters were getting sidelined, like Iron Man. Iron Man's been sidelined in favor of a black teenage girl. Iron Man fans reacted negatively. There weren't a lot of, African American girls coming into comic shops to find this new character that would really appeal to them, I feel. So there wasn't a way to get it in there, so they didn't pick up anything on the backside. And so it's a systemic problem. Until you figure out a way to get these kind of products in front of more people of color, more women, you're going to have a problem. Every time you move away from this kind of white male paradigm, the purists are going to pitch a hissy fit, and you're not picking up anything on the back end. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. When you had somebody like Kamala Khan, who did not bear the burden of having replaced a popular male hero, it shows that the negative reaction went away, and when left on their own merits, people will respond positively. I'm going to go out there and say the female Thor and the female Wolverine run, both of which I've been reading, are fantastic. Wolverine's been boring for about a couple decades now because there's just so much dark and gritty that you can get in the world.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
I have loved the, X-23, his, clone. They put her in his shoes, and it's allowing you to tell different kinds of Wolverine stories. I think it's fantastic. It's better than Wolverine has been in years. And, I don't follow the numbers. I'm always surprised when the book gets canceled and the rug gets pulled out from under me. But I'm really hoping people are reading that because it's just a great story. And Thor, the current female Thor is also, it's the same creative team that was writing the very critically acclaimed male Thor earlier. And this was a story they wanted to tell, and they're doing a great job with it. The new Thor is a lot of fun. It's, again, very, very well written, and there's no reason not to enjoy these stories other than kind of pettiness. I'm sure we already have the male Thor back, and I'm sure at some point they will bring back the Logan version of Wolverine. But, just enjoy these stories while you got them. What they're doing now is actually really good, and I think, people should give it more of a chance.
And then John brought up a really good point about the hypocrisy of some of the claims of people not liking the change.
Well, people, say, oh, yeah, that's the big problem is that we don't like, the change of things. But when you have things like Bucky Barnes becomes Captain America for a couple years, don't remember much of an outcry. Or when, even when after Crisis on Infinite Earths, when Barry Allen died and Wally West became the Flash for a decade, there were a few people that I kind of like Barry better, but you didn't have these protests. Saying that, oh, I just love the original character, that's part of it, but when the character's race or gender changes, that's when all of a sudden people seem to get upset. There's also I have kind of a theory, it's like, comic books, characters are like a bus. There's a bus of comic book characters. We can only love so many and you keep expanding, then there's just too many small ones that are okay, but there's only a certain number of titles that can be published. There's only there's a limited amount people are going to buy. So if you pack the bus full of white men in the 40s and 60s, and then there's 2 or 3 spots left over for everybody else, you're never going to achieve that kind of vision of a comic book world that more reflects the real world around us. If we have to keep this, white male Justice League, all the characters that were in there, we have to keep them, then there are very few, they're going to publish all those titles, and then there's only going to be a couple that are available for anybody who's not white and male.
That completes part 2 of our 3-part interview with John Marcotte, creator of HeroicGirls.com. Tune in next time for part 3, the final part in our interview, where we talk to him about being a man speaking on feminist issues, his TED Talk, and the future of Heroic Girls. Thanks for listening to this edition of Mayday, the Handmaid's Tale podcast. You can find us on Twitter at @HandmaidPodcast. You can find us on Instagram as well, and on Facebook. On behalf of everyone here at the show, thanks, and we'll see you next week.